Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sebastian Gonzalez. I work for the Manchester Chamber of Commerce. I believe is everybody here already. We're just gonna wait 1 minute, okay? I just want to make sure everybody's here. Perfect. Thank you, Anthony. Okay. Today we are going to talk about partner finding in USA. As I said before, just a welcome words. I work for the Manchester Chamber of Commerce. My name is Sebastian Gonzalez. I work in the international trade team for the last few years. Basically, the Chamber of Commerce, we have got more than 4,000 members. We cover all Greater Manchester, as you may know, Bolton, Bury, Trafford, Wigan, etc. Also, one of the we provide services through our sector: manufacturing, engineering, property, financial services. One of the most important services we provide as Chamber of Commerce is market entry. For example, if you're looking for to explore market in Europe or any part of the world, we can help you. And also, we do have courses available in different topics, training courses and free Bitesize session. Also, we provide as a Chamber of Commerce bespoke advice and one sec. Oops. Yeah. We also provide a letter of credit, getting paid services. We have an export doc office, as you may know. We have two offices, one in Elliot House in Manchester, and also at the airport. If you're looking for certificate origin, Euro ones or ATR carnet, please get in touch because we can help you. One sec. Thank you. Customer declaration as well. If you're looking to export or import, we do provide customer declarations, import declarations. If you are thinking to take products outside the country or bring in products in the UK, we can help you. Okay, and courses and Bitesize sessions. We have Bitesize sessions available, so these Bitesize sessions are for free for you to book. The next one is the Windsor framework, and you may know, and there is a new deal with the North Island Protocol, and we're going to talk about this in the 18th of May. How to select the right trade show exhibitions, the 24th of May, and export control, everything about export control, why they exist, in the 19th of June, okay? All sort of courses we have available as well. I'm not gonna name all of them, but as you could see there, we have export documentations, rule of origins, ATR carnet, Incoterm, etc. Just gonna open the first one. So I'm gonna share that with you so you could have a look just with a link. When you open the link, you will find a lot of information there, also the content of every course, okay? Then the next one. So now I'm going to introduce Joe and also Dennis. Dennis is going to be in the end of the presentation, and Joe is going to talk about the US market and partner finding overview. Hand over to you, Joe.
All right, thank you very much. If you could start the slide.
Okay. One sec.
So very happy to be here. Actually, if you could go back one.
Yeah.
So very happy to be here. Delighted to be working with the Chamber. Had an association with the Chamber now for about 2 years, working with a number of companies. Really exciting things going on there in the Greater Manchester area, and also in the UK. So by way of my background, very briefly, I have a sales and marketing background, worked for state government in Pennsylvania, working with Pennsylvania companies, helping them to sell their products overseas, and also attracting investment into the US. For the last 2.5 years, I've been working with foreign-based companies, helping them to enter the US market. Finding a lot of the learning that happened with the US companies going abroad is very transferable to foreign-based companies coming here. So next slide, please. So kind of put things in context, I like to give sort of like a market overview. So the US is the world's largest, most open market with a real GDP in 2022 of almost 21 trillion pounds. That's $25.5 trillion. So it's a very, very large economy, and as I said, very receptive. The most important exporters to the US in 2021, and I believe, well, that's the most current information I was able to dig up, but I believe it's the exact same thing for 2022, is the People's Republic of China. And in that year, they exported to the US 424 billion pounds of product. That was followed by Mexico, Canada, Japan, Germany, South Korea, and our seventh most important importer is the UK at 59 trillion. What's interesting is that Mexico and Canada used to be Canada used to be number one, and Mexico was number two. Now Canada is decreasing in importance, still very important, but is decreasing in importance. The People's Republic of China as a whole is on both the export and the import side, is the most important trading partner with the US. So what's also interesting is that the US actually has a trade surplus with the UK. There aren't a whole lot of countries that we enjoy that relationship with, but we do with the UK. And you're the fifth largest market for our exports. So the top US exports to the US from the UK in 2021 were chemicals, plastics, rubber, and leather products, 21%, machinery and mechanical appliances, again, almost 21%, transportation equipment, 18%, special items, these would include re-exports, articles for charity, and miscellaneous military equipment was number 5, and then oils, minerals, lime, and cement was number 6. To kind of put that in context, the United States actually is the biggest importer in the world of cars and motor vehicle products, followed by computers, pharmaceuticals, broadcasting equipment, and crude petroleum. So I believe in chemicals, that number 1 position, that also includes pharmaceutical products. Next slide, please. So I think it's important, given the fact that the US is such a large market, to kind of understand which are the top growth sectors in the US. That doesn't preclude or say that other sectors are not, that there aren't opportunities, but these are and these are not completely comprehensive, but these are some of the top industries. So healthcare is number 1 by far. That's because we have an aging population. In fact, most of the baby boomers in the US were born after the war, 1946 to 1964, and a great mass of them now are heading into retirement. And as you get older, you have more problems. So that's why the aging population is one of the biggest drivers of the healthcare system. Of course, medical advances in pharma, med device, and the support that they receive from the US government and investors. Biotechnology, cell and gene therapy, and regenerative therapies are very, very strong and growing areas. And a lot of this also was driven by the medical health care reform, commonly known here as Obamacare. So that is a driver in the industry. Technology broadly is also a very large sector. Healthcare, as I previously mentioned, is a driver. So a lot of the technology that goes into healthcare, but then advanced manufacturing, and that also gets into some of the discussions about these new terms, reshoring, nearshoring, and friendshoring. So advanced manufacturing is also trying to bring back or to grow the technology in manufacturing in the US. And of course, that also encompasses artificial intelligence, and that would be machine learning, augmented and virtual reality. And those are very large growth sectors. Autonomous vehicles also under technology is a where a lot of investment is happening as well. Interestingly, and perhaps not surprisingly, Tesla is the number one investor in autonomous vehicles. But there are about 4 or 5 others, and there's been changes in the industry where some pulled back, some were bought, but there is still a lot of investment going on in that technology. And of course, cloud computing. And another very large growth sector is in the construction area. So residential and commercial construction is very important. Residential, so it's kind of changing a bit. So commercial is down, but we expect that to grow as people start to go back to work. Residential is a growth sector, particularly since people have been moving out of the major metropolitan areas because of the work from home. But again, people are being forced back into back to work, which will hopefully invigorate the commercial sector. And the residential is being hurt a little bit by the change in or the sudden burst in mortgage rates. But also sustainable advances are very important in construction. A lot of it has to do with LEED certification, particularly in commercial buildings. And one of the sectors that is growing here is with timber built buildings. So timber built and that whole technology is sustainable, but there aren't very many that know how to do it. But now cities are changing their code so that you can go up to 18 stories now with timber built construction. Next slide, please. Continuing on in that subject, energy is obviously a very big growth area. Renewables has been certainly on the forefront. There have been subsidies that have been around that for wind and solar. But the country is so large that there are some places where that works and some places that it doesn't. You have to have enough sunshine. So California, Florida, great. Maybe New Hampshire and the northern areas, maybe not so much. But fossil fuels continues to be a growth area in the United States. And part of that is certainly because of what's going on in the world, but also because of huge discoveries in the shale. The Marcellus Shale is one, but the shale and oil. So we found just in this area of the country, in the Northeast, mid-Northeast, mid-Atlantic Northeast, there's the Utica Shale, the Marcellus Shale, and then moving westward, there's the Bakken Shale. So there's about a 50-year growth potential per discovery. So that's very important for energy independence in the US. Nuclear, surprisingly, is listed also as a growth area. I believe that there's 2 nuclear plants that are supposed to come online. So 2 may not sound like much, but there's a lot that goes into a nuclear plant. On the flip side, there's also decommissioned nuclear plants, and there's a lot that goes on with that as well. E-commerce, online shopping, everybody knows about that. Fulfillment centers, all of that is a real growth area. Financial services, fintech, that is a huge area. A lot of startup companies, growth companies buying each other. Very open to new technologies in that area. Digital banking, which is something that particularly the younger people, they don't want to go into the bank anymore. They want to do everything online on their smartphones. So digital banking still is important. Surprisingly, they are still building banks because they're there are still a cohort that still likes to go in and talk to someone. Transport or transportation would include people, commodities, materials via pipeline, rails, ships, and roads. So when we talked a little bit about fossil fuels, they move primarily by pipelines and rails. So these things are sort of interconnected. We saw what happened with shipping, but that is a real growth area, particularly when we talk about the not shipbuilding, but port facilities and investment and new technologies there. And that's because there's increased capacity and new technologies, including electric transportation, which we touched on when we talked about Tesla and others. Leisure and hospitality. So this is the fastest growing area by job openings in the US. And a lot of that has to do with pent-up demand. We're seeing hotels being built. We are seeing hotels being filled. There's a problem, of course, with labor, but it all has to do with pent-up demand. So we're finding or we're seeing that more people are certainly getting on the road and driving more in spite of the higher gas prices or petrol prices. But people have a pent-up demand after the last 2 years to go somewhere. Next slide, please. So, as I said, the United States is a very large country with different specialties in different areas, and that's depending on a lot of it's demographic. A lot of it's driven by the industries that have traditionally been there. A lot of it's been driven by innovation, and that has a lot to do with the universities that are clustered there. But a great place to find out is particularly if you've got an unusual product or maybe a Me Too product. Where are they based in the U.S.? Where are the clusters? Do I want to go there because I've got something innovative, or do I want to go somewhere else that maybe I've got it's saturated in one place and there might be opportunities in another? So this cluster mapping that the U.S. or the Select USA has put together is very, very helpful. The Select USA is a division of the U.S. Department of Commerce. It's been around for about 10 years. And it's been doing a great job. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the clusters that we have in the United States, and also to talk about some of the things that you might not have thought about. So if you're into space and aeronautics and those areas or those industries that feed into it, the obvious places are Florida, where you have Cape Canaveral, Texas, where you have the Johnson Space Center, Washington State, where you have Boeing, Virginia, where there's a lot of companies that support the space industry because it's particularly Northern Virginia, because it's so close to Washington, D.C. But what you might not think about are opportunities are also in other places, such as Oklahoma and Kansas. There's a lot going on there in the space industry. And Pennsylvania is an example, and this is actually more clustered in the western part of the state by Carnegie Mellon. Carnegie Mellon has fostered new space startups, and companies are starting to look at that area. It's unusual, but that's where a lot of space startup companies and innovation is taking place. We talked about oil and gas. Common places: Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Alaska. Texas and Louisiana certainly, and Oklahoma to a lesser extent, are where the refineries are. But we're also seeing, because of new finds and technologies, that places like Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and North Dakota. So Pennsylvania, West Virginia are more the mid-Atlantic area. North Dakota in the sort of upper Midwest, finding big deposits of fossil fuel or shale gas. Which has revolutionized industry as well here, because companies want to be close to the source of energy. And I thought, just for fun, craft breweries is also a very large growing area. And California has the most, 931, Pennsylvania, 486, New York, 485, Colorado, 428. But Colorado, interestingly, has the most combined breweries, so traditional breweries and others. But what you might not think about are there are more breweries per capita in places like Portland, Maine, Asheville, North Carolina, Bend, Oregon. So it's important, and I point this out because it's important to get localized market knowledge. For somebody like myself at Evoca Strategies, we've got access to people that have this localized knowledge. We can ferret through the information. So, so next slide, please. So some of the challenges of entering the U.S. market would include, again, it's a large, diversified, competitive, but it's also a very receptive market. Again, regional markets that have different consumer tastes and state regulations. One of the things I like to point out is in terms of consumer taste, as I used to work for Kraft, and on the West Coast of the US, they like their cheese kind of an orangey yellow. On the eastern part of the US, they like their cheese white or more white. So you have to be aware of these consumer tastes as well as the regulations, which can be different state by state. Generally the same, but there are different state regulations. So market entry is actually more expensive, oftentimes than companies plan. This has to do with your localized product labeling, adaptation to the market, different standards that you may have, size or weight or measurement even on the labels. So different standards. Take into consideration the distance. Your product would be coming from the UK. I usually counsel companies from the UK if the market's right. Really look for the East Coast of the US, up and down, particularly where you might have flights. Take into consideration or direct flights, the time difference. If you want to talk to consumers or your customers, you have to bear that in mind. And then managing your distributor, taking that into consideration, given the time differences, et cetera. So it's really, really important to do your research to find out how competitive your market segment is, who are your competitors, where you might have a niche or an opening, or to share the pie or to grow the pie. Important to take into consideration pricing. Are you competitively priced? If you're more expensive, why are you more expensive, and can use that to your advantage? Again, looking at a regional market or a state, it's much more manageable for initial entry. Important really to understand the supply chain and how products move throughout the country. Intellectual property, do you need to protect your IP? And also to take into consideration now data privacy. You're accustomed to that in Europe and the UK, but California has been out front with data privacy. That's probably going to continue on with the rest of the United States at some point. And then look at your branding considerations. Very important are to look at your trade shows and trade missions. So trade shows in the US, there are a lot. But it's important to go to those trade shows to understand who your competitor is, how to adjust your pricing, how to adjust your product, learn and meet people. Also trade missions. I know that the former UK DIT used to do trade missions. They still do. The trade missions are very good because it can also be very targeted as well. Develop a plan, but prepare to adjust. Excuse me. So you need to have a marketing and a market entry strategy, but be prepared to adjust. I think we all learned from the pandemic that we have to be able to pivot. I think Dennis may touch on this as well, but we do speak the same language, but we have different meanings. One of my favorite stories is I had a German company over here that was looking to purchase a US company. And there was a difference between what is understood as turnover. So the US company was asked by the German company, what's your turnover? And the US company looked at them and said, we're very happy and proud to say that our turnover has been 0 for the last 5 years. But what they didn't understand, but which we did clarify, is that turnover means revenue in Europe. Turnover here means employees that have churned through. So you might, how many employees you churn through the system, they come and go. Next slide, please. So identifying the best distributor, and I want to be conscious of time here. You want to work with a distributor who understands your product line, who has proven access to customers and contacts, has technical expertise, licenses, and certifications if necessary, and is interested in selling your product. One of the things that you have to keep in mind is like whoever you choose and however you go through the vetting, you need to be able to have access to share of mind. So will you be in their top 5, or will you be one of many? Will you complement their line, or will you be a flagship for their line? So you also have to understand the process by which distributors determine their margins, the commissions that have to be paid, and the assumption of financial liability. So you need to is the markup that will take place here with the distributor and the customer here, will your margin after that be something that you can live with? And then how much you obviously how much you have to pay your distributor, as well as if there's a problem, who has financial liability, or if so. That's why it's very important also to construct a very, very good contract. Understand the difference between exclusivity and multiple reps, and regional and category responsibility. We oftentimes counsel companies do not sign an exclusive agreement with a distributor for too large of an area, and also build in a timeline that it'll sunset, renegotiated, et cetera. And visit your potential partners' facilities. I found oftentimes that U.S. companies have one idea of standards and facilities, and the distributor or their partner abroad has a different idea of what that is. And it's very important, particularly if you're adding value to a product, to know that it meets your standards and also the standards of the market. And take your time and base your decisions on facts. Everybody wants to like and respect their distributor, but don't let that be the controlling decision. So take your time and base it on the facts. Next slide, please. Oh, your partners. So you want to work with experienced partners. A great one is, as Sebastian has also already mentioned, is the Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce. They've got great stuff. They can help you if you're new to market. They can do assessments. They can help you with your financing, understand financing options, your Incoterms, help you get to that next level. So the Department of Business and Trade, which until very recently was the UK DIT, and it's taken me a while to remember DBT, has something called Export Academy, which is a series of modules. They're excellent. They have sector-focused resources and a market guide by sector. Again, excellent. They also do matchmaking services, so when you're ready to come into the market, they will help set up appointments here with vetted agents, distributors, or if you want to do a joint venture or technology transfers, that sort of thing. And they oftentimes work with partners such as myself at Evoca Strategies. Select USA is also another great resource. It gives an overview of market and cluster mapping, access to state partners. There are 50 of them, and each state government has people that are responsible for attracting investment and working with foreign partners. Select USA provides an overview of incentives by state for investment. Each state will do something different, generally the same thing, but will have different financial incentives to enter the market. Important really to work with experienced trade consultants with market knowledge, connections regionally, and access to decision makers, people that have relationships here. Local chambers of commerce and your regional British chambers of commerce are really, really important as well. I should mention that I've also found that something called the Google Market Finder, which is, at least as I've been looking at it, it's really, really good. And the Santander Bank provides Santander Navigator, which is also provides a great service. So there's plenty of resources out there, just a matter of taking advantage of them. Next slide, please. So thank you very much. Really privileged to discuss this. Hope I didn't go too far over time. And with that, I'm happy to turn the mic over to Dennis Unkovic.
Good morning. I'm Dennis Unkovic. I've got 20 minutes, so I'm going to fly through this. Sebastian, I'm going to ignore most of the slides that you have, but you can bring up the next one. By way of background, I've been doing international business for 40 years. You can see how old I am. I've been to 63 countries around the world doing business, and I head up a firm of 65 lawyers in Pittsburgh. That's enough about me. What I want to talk to you about today is, next slide, next slide, next slide. Let's go 3-4 slides here. Basically, globalization is changing. There are rising political tensions around the world, and the US-UK ties are really important because if there's a country you want to be from today where you want to do business in the United States, you're there. I think the relationship between the UK and the US has never been better and won't be better. Now we're talking about, next slide, the foreign US FTA, UK FTA, free trade agreement. It's not going to happen in the near future. Our Congress at this point is really screwed up and focusing on other issues. But the relationship that the US government wants to promote with the UK is good. That's all you need to know. Next slide. There are 7 things that I was going to cover today, but since I only have about 18 or 20 minutes left, I'm going to go through them very, very quickly. The first fundamental is, next slide. I will slow down in a minute. Next slide, please. I've said this before. We love the UK. I actually like football or soccer, unlike a lot of Americans, and it's not just that. But I think there is an ease of relationship, not just because of the common language we share, but because we generally have been doing business together for a long time. Next point. This is something I want to focus just on for a minute. They talk about the US as being an open market and easy in which to do business. That's not true. The US is the most complex market in the world in which to do business. That said, as you saw before, with a $25 trillion economy, it's worth looking at. But we have a federal level, we have state level, 50 of them, and we have local levels, which can be city, municipalities, and states. Okay. When you do business in the United States, you're going to have to be aware of the fact that there are laws that are sometimes contradictory that you have to work together. I'll give you examples in a minute, but don't let that deter you. But what you need to do early on is to decide, understanding your own business, where do you want to be? And I think Joe talked about this very, very well before. Some people think that Texas is not really part of the United States. It's like another country because it's so different from doing business there than in California than it is in Pennsylvania. So when you're thinking about the US, you obviously have to understand the service or the product that you're going to be building. Now, you really are in a situation today where there are 4 things. If you're looking at the US doing business here, you're in one of the boxes. You're in a box where you want to have an agent or a representative initially to start off. That's primarily what I'm going to focus on. Secondly, you may want to do a joint venture. I'll talk about that briefly. You may end up setting up a company or an LLC. I can talk about that very, very quickly. Or you can acquire all or part of a U.S. company. But I thought today, not knowing your companies or exactly who you are or what you need, I thought I would focus on basically finding an agent. Next slide, please. Or a representative here in the United States. And a distributor is somebody who actually has your products. An agent is somebody who's just working here. Now, I've been doing this literally for 40 years, and what I found out is that there is no silver bullet. If you're looking for me to tell you what works and what doesn't work, I can't do that. It's sort of like trying to find the ideal mate when you're 25 or 30 years old. There are lots of ways to go out and try to find him or her or it or whatever, but you have to try different things. So what I thought I would do over the next few minutes is to talk to you about, if you are coming into the United States for the first time, what are the kind of things or where do you want to look to find that company? And so on the next slide, I talk about how do you find the right agent or representative. I know I'm talking quickly, but I want to get all this information in. Now, the first thing to do is decide where in the United States you want to do business. It has 345 million people, give or take a couple of million, and it's spread out over 50 states. And so if you're coming here for the first time, regardless of your company's size, you want to know where you want to be. I represent a German company one time that was in a food-related business. Can't mention what they did, but they wanted to have their food produced in Europe. They wanted to bring it here to the United States, essentially warehouse it. They wanted to set up a facility, and they wanted to sell it around the U.S. I gave them some advice, which they ignored, and they ended up being in Georgia, in a small town about 80 miles outside of Atlanta, which is a very large, as you know, city in the southern part of the United States. The problem was where they had their operation set up was the wrong state, because where most of their customers were in the Northeast or in the far West. They really were not in the South. And so the first thing you want to think about is, where is the best place to be? Joe, a few minutes ago, gave you the 7 or 8 or 10, areas of what the hot areas are. Look at those very carefully, because that's extremely important. Then, if you want to find an agent or a representative to work with, you can go to the Manchester Chamber of Commerce. They can help you. You can hire private people like Joe, who, I don't do this, by the way, I'm not looking for business for myself. You can hire somebody like Joe who can specialize and help you find something. But if you want to do it on your own, or at least initially you want to explore it, look for what the major opportunity that exists for your service or your product in the United States. And so, all right, you're saying, oh my gosh, how do I find somebody? Where do I go? Well, the answer is that if you're looking for an agent, that's where we are on the slide here right now, don't change it. When we're thinking about that, how do you find the agent? It's sort of like I said before, what do you do when you're looking for the right mate in which to, spend the rest of your life with? Well, we've talked about the Chamber of Commerce, right? We've talked about the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. That was on the former slide. But my advice to you is the challenge of finding that person is extremely difficult, because it's not just for you coming here to the U.S., it's for U.S. companies, because we've had a great number of people retire, people my age, basically, I'm not retired, but who decided, okay, I'm not going to work anymore. So there are a great number of people in the United States who have knowledge of particular industries who are extremely valuable. If you go to a trade show, all right, as was suggested earlier, you might find, as an initial step, people that you want to do business with. And I think that makes sense. I was flying back I do a lot of work in the Far East. I was flying back one time, and this young man, he was like 28 or 30, he was sitting next to me. And the worst thing on a flight is to sit there in the first 5 minutes, have the person turn to you and say, hi, how are you? What do you do? I'm making a joke. I hope you've all been there. And you say, oh, I'm fine. I say, what about you? He says, I'm so happy. I have found exactly what my boss wants. I'm going back to tell him. And I said, what did your boss tell you to do? He said, well, we want to do business in Thailand. I flew to Thailand about 6 days ago. I went into a bar and I met this man, and he was so interesting, and he told me about his family and how well connected they are. I hired him to be our agent representative in Thailand. I'm so excited to go back and tell my boss. That's sort of like meeting somebody in a bar that you want to hook up with on a Friday night, having a good time, and marrying them next day. Obviously, that's possible, and sometimes it works, but the chances are, I don't know how it is in the UK, but in the US, if you get married, half the time it doesn't work out. Doesn't matter who did what to whom or what the situation is, it didn't work. And a lot of that applies to finding agents and distributors. So going to trade shows helps, but it really isn't going to necessarily solve your problem unless you just do absolutely the right thing at the right time. And so what I think you need to do is, in your particular industry, try to find someone who is older, i.e. over 60 years old, who may or may not be working for another company, but who wants to hang around for a while. I'll give you an example. Obviously, I can't say specifically what it is, but there's this German company that represents 5 or 6 German companies that are in the steel-related business. I talked to them couple of months ago. What they wanted to do is they wanted to find the right person in the US who could essentially represent them, because they represent these other things, who could essentially promote those products throughout the United States. They're in the steel-related business. I happen to know a little bit about that business from my practice. So I hooked them up with a gentleman who had been a president of a company over here, who had retired at 60, and his wife was tired of having him at home. I know that's a joke, but probably true. Please go to work. So he was a guy who knew the steel industry for 40 years. By having someone like him who understood the industry, understood the major players, and had contacts, was exactly the right person. So this individual ended up representing that German group of companies here in the United States highly successfully. There are two ways to do this. You either hire them and pay them a salary with a commission, or you give them a full commission. In this particular case, the guy said, if I find you work, X work, I want a third of what the value of whatever that is. He was willing to work for free. If you wanted the same person to work for you, you might end up paying $100,000, $150,000 that person to go around the country. There are different kind of ways to do this. Oh, one other thing I should mention. You're in the UK. You're like the US. We have common law systems. We sort of write down our contracts, and that's what they are. If you're going to have an agent or distributor, what you want to do is have a written contract with them. If you talk to somebody and they say, oh, no, we understand each other, let's just have a handshake, either you or that person are brain damaged. Because in the US, if it isn't in a contract, it doesn't exist. Now, most of you, I think on this call, probably do business somewhere in the EU or elsewhere, of course. But as you know, in the EU, there are very strict laws, in civil code countries, where it describes what does an agent distributor do, what are your obligations, what are their obligations. What you need to remember in the US, that does not exist. And so, first of all, have a contract with that agent or representative. And secondly, write every damn thing that you want to have covered in that contract in the contract. Otherwise, you're probably going to have a problem. Now in Europe, and that's good for you in one respect, as you know, if you have an agent or representative in the UK, in the EU, and you're in the UK, oftentimes if you terminate them, you can have a lawsuit because you've had them for 20 years and you get rid of them because you don't like them and they're unhappy, and then you get into all that kind of stuff. You don't have those problems in the US. If you write the right size contract, the right terms are in that contract, and you have the person sign it, you can hire them for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and then you can terminate it if you want. Another suggestion, if you have these representatives out there, what are you going to do? One of the things I'd suggest is if you have them working for you, if you have a line of products, let's say you have 4 lines of products, don't hire them the first time to handle all of your line of products. Hire them or have a relationship with them for 1 line of products. So if they screw up or don't do what you want, you still have the ability to go elsewhere without having problems. I mean, that sounds like common sense, but I can't tell you how many times in my career I've seen people who have gone the other way. And so my advice is look for somebody. You're not going to find a 25 or 30-year-old or 35-year-old person who's probably going to want to rep for you, who has the knowledge and understanding of the business. And so look for other people. I have a Southern European company I'm working with, can't say what they are, but what they did is they wanted to have 1 or 2 people in the US repping them here so that they could send the business back there. What they did, instead of hiring just a person by contract or paying them some salary, what did they end up doing? They ended up setting up a small operation with 1 or 2 people in the US inside of a larger company who happened to be one of their major customers in the US. Good relationship, they worked with each other, and then it allowed them to go out and do business. And so, as I said before, there's no silver bullet here. There's nothing that you can do that will automatically work, but there are ways that you can intelligently approach it. Another thing that I don't think Joe has mentioned or Sebastian has mentioned is there are trade associations. If I ask you to guess how many trade associations exist in the United States, you probably wouldn't know. Try 10,000. And what you're going to do is, if you have a particular service or particular product, look in the US. There's actually a book called The Book of Associations in the US, something like that. But you find an association in the area where it is and go visit with them or look at their website, and they will really understand your market. First of all, to give you a better idea, do you want to do this in the US? If not, go talk to that association, because maybe they will be able to hook you up or give you better market intelligence on what it is that you want to do. Now, since I only have 4 minutes left, because we're leaving 10 minutes at the end of this program for your questions. If you don't have any questions, we're done. But if you do have questions, Sebastian is there and he'll feed them to us. So let's go to the next slide. If you don't want to establish a physical presence in the United States, you may not want to actually have operations here because there are tax consequences. So the reason that you have an agent distributor at first is just hire somebody over here, pay them one way or the other, so you're not really subject to US taxes. But next point, if you do decide to come to the US, you may need to set up a company. Now, listen to me carefully, avoid a partnership. A partnership is like a handshake. If you have a handshake, if your partner does something, you're responsible. So if you're actually going to set up operations in the US and have one or more employees here, you're going to need to set up some kind of company. There are two options. One's a joint venture as an example. You could form a LLC or a corporation, and then that could have a relationship with an existing US company. I actually have a book on describing what an LLC and a corporation is. If you want a copy of it, tell Sebastian, and I'll send you some copies so you can look at them. But the final point I want to cover here, point 7, is if you're going to consider acquiring or a company in the US, a joint venture means you sort of go together for a limited purpose. That's different. But some companies like yours decide the best way into the US is not to screw around with having an agent or distributor and not to have a joint venture, but I actually want to acquire a company. This is something I do a lot of for companies all over the world. The one thing you want to remember is when you buy a company here in the US, it's like marrying or partnering up with someone else. You pick up all the good and sometimes the bad of what is there. And so you have to do very, very careful due diligence. Now, I've got, next slide, please. In conclusion, I know I've talked quickly, but again, I want to leave time for your questions, and I hope they're questions. As a UK company or investor, it's a really good time to look at doing business in the United States. Our economy is a little bit shaky, but basically okay. But it is opening up, as Joe told you a few minutes ago, in a number of areas. And there are a lot of opportunities here. Because of the increasingly bad relationship between the United States and China, I've written a book on this if you're interested, but what you're going to see happening is more US companies are going to be focusing their interest away from China and reshoring back to the US, or focusing more on Europe, and particularly the UK. So if I was saying to you, is this a good or a bad time to look around? I think it's a really, really good time. The final thing, I know I'm repeating, but I think it's important. If you want to find an agent or a representative here in the US, what you need to remember is you don't want somebody who's 25 or 30 or 35 years old. They don't have the experience or the contacts. Look for somebody who's been in the business for a while in the US. Now, they can be a British expat living here in the US. That's something you could do. Or it could be a US individual, but use them for 2 or 3 years in the beginning, if you can, to form a good understanding of the US and to decide, do you want to make a major investment? Now, if you're a larger company, several hundreds of employees, you probably don't want to go through this. You're probably going to make a larger investment and just end up coming into the US more quickly. I've done in the last 20 minutes is to try to quickly explain to you what the waterfront is. This is my conclusion. I'm Dennis Unkovic. Thank you for your time. Sebastian, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Right. Thank you very much. Just one sec.